Okay, here we are, devotional number 4, 3, whatever it is, Romans 2. We're in Romans chapter 2, so I'll give you a chance to turn there, and we'll get started. Romans 2. God is kind, but He's not soft. These people are on a dark spiral downward, picking up from Romans 1, where we just left off. But if you think that leaves you on the high ground where you can point your fingers at others, think again. Every time you criticize someone, you condemn yourself. It takes one to know one. Judgmental criticism of others is a well-known way of escaping detection in your own crimes and misdemeanors. But God isn't so easily diverted. He sees right through all such smoke screens and holds you to what you've done. You didn't think, did you, that just by pointing your finger at others, you would distract God from seeing all your misdoings and from coming down on you hard? Or did you think that because He's such a nice God, He'd let you off the hook? Better think this one through from the beginning. God is kind, but He's not soft. In kindness, He takes us firmly by the hand and leads us into a radical life change. You're not getting by with anything. Every refusal and avoidance of God adds fuel to the fire. The day is coming when it's going to blaze hot and high. God's fiery and righteous judgment. Make no mistake. In the end, you'll get what's coming to you. Real life for those who work on God's side. But to those who insist on getting their own way and take the path of least resistance, fire. If you go against the grain, you get splinters, regardless of which neighborhood you're from, what your parents taught you, what schools you attended. But if you embrace the way God does things, there are wonderful payoffs. Again, without regard to where you are from or how you were brought up. Being a Jew won't give you an automatic stamp of approval. God pays no attention to what others say or what you think they say about you. He makes up His own mind. If you sin without knowing what you're doing, God takes that into account. But if you sin knowing full well what you're doing, that's a different story entirely. Merely hearing God's law is a waste of your time if you don't do what He commands. Doing, not hearing, is what makes a difference with God. Verse 14. Pay attention to this part. When outsiders, who have never heard of God's law, follow it more or less by instinct, they confirm its truth by their obedience. They show that God's law is not something alien, imposed on us from without, but rather it's woven into the very fabric of our creation. There's something deep within them that echoes God's yes and no, right and wrong. Their response to God's yes and no will become public knowledge on the day God makes His final decision about every man and woman. The message from God that I proclaim through Jesus Christ takes into account all these things. If you're brought up Jewish, don't assume that you can lean back in the arms of your religion and take it easy, feeling smug because you're an insider to God's revelation, a connoisseur of the best things of God, informed on the latest doctrines. I have a special word of caution for you who are sure that you have it all together yourselves, and because you know God's revealed word inside and out, feel qualified to guide others through their blind alleys and their dark nights and confused emotions to God. While you are guiding others, who's going to guide you? I'm quite serious. While preaching don't steal, are you going to rob people blind? Who would suspect you? The same with adultery, the same with idolatry. You can get by with almost anything if you front it with eloquent talk about God and His law. The line from Scripture, "It is because of you Jews that the outsiders are down on God." This shows it's an old problem that's not about to go away. Circumcision, this surgical ritual that marks you as a Jew, is great and fine if you live in accordance with God's law. But if you don't, it's worse than being circumcised. The reverse is also true. The uncircumcised who keep God's ways are as good as the circumcised. In fact, they're better. It's better to keep God's law uncircumcised than to break it and be circumcised. Don't you see? It's not the cut of a knife that makes you a Jew. You become a Jew by who you are. It's the mark of God on your heart, not a knife on your skin that makes you a Jew. And recognition comes from God, not legalistic critics. Now we're going to do the study a little bit differently. Instead of me looking through this text and offering my insights, I'd like to hear your insights into this particular passage. And just to clear up a little bit of confusion, possibly when Paul writes about Jews, he's referring to God's people. Your genetics don't make you a follower of Christ. It's your heart. He's referring to a promise as old as the beginning of time. Genesis 12, 1-3, God's promise to Abraham. On the same token, he's talking to the Jews, the genetic Jews, who are falling back on their heritage and believing that because I'm genetically a Jew, that means that I have automatic favor with God. Because I've been circumcised, as all good Jewish people do, I'm acceptable in God's eyes. And Paul's saying nothing could be further from the truth. So that's just to clear up a little bit of confusion. And so what I'd like you to do is if you're with a group right now, discuss it with the group. What verse sticks out to you? If you're just watching this on your own, then write a little comment under the video and let everybody know what verse sticks out to you in this passage. I read from the Message. You read from any version that you have, and just write a verse for us. What verse stuck out to you? What does this mean to you? Maybe some ones that I direct your attention to. If I was giving insights, I would direct your attention to verses 11 to 16, and particularly verse 15 and how it relates to the previous chapter, Romans 1:20. So maybe take a look at that. How does Romans 1:20 and Romans 2:15 relate to each other? So what are your insights? Please leave a comment after this video. I know I'll be checking it and learning from what God is teaching you. What I want to do in our short time together is I want to actually read the introduction. It's just a one-page introduction that the Message, written by Eugene Peterson, gives to the book of Romans. I think I read it and I was inspired, and maybe it'll inspire you as well. So let me read this introduction that the Message gives to the book of Romans. The event that split history into before and after and changed the world took place about 30 years before Paul wrote this letter. The event, of course, the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, took place in a remote corner of the extensive Roman Empire, the province of Judea in Palestine. Hardly anyone noticed, certainly no one in busy and powerful Rome. And when this letter arrived in Rome, hardly anyone read it, certainly no one of influence. There was much to read in Rome: imperial decrees, exquisite poetry, finely crafted moral philosophy, and much of it was world-class. And yet in no time, as such things go, this letter, the book of Romans, left all those other writings in the dust. Paul's letter to the Romans has had a far larger impact on its readers than the volumes of all those Roman writers put together. The quick rise of this letter to a peak of influence is extraordinary, written as it was by an obscure Roman citizen without connection. But when we read it for ourselves, we begin to realize that it is the letter itself that is truly extraordinary, and that no obscurity in writer or readers could have kept this letter obscure for long. The letter to the Romans is a piece of exuberant and passionate thinking. This is the glorious life of a mind enlisted in the service of God. Paul takes the well-witnessed and devoutly believed fact of the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth and thinks through its implications. How does it happen that in the death and resurrection of Jesus, world history took a new direction, and at the same moment the life of every man and woman and child on the planet was eternally affected? What is God up to? What does it mean that Jesus saves? What's behind all this, and where is it going? These are the questions that drive Paul's thinking. Paul's mind is supple and capacious. He takes logic and argument, poetry and imagination, scripture and prayer, creation and history and experience, and weaves them into this letter that has become the premier document of Christian theology. That's the introduction. That's Romans 2. So please add your comment after this video and let us know what verse stuck out or what really impacted you about this little segment of Paul's letter to the people in Rome. Thank you.